introduce your panelists and yourself. So please give Nicole a big round of applause.
Hi.
Your mic's on.
Is it on?
Should be.
Is this on? Oh my God, I'm like on Murray Povich. Hi everybody. My name is Nicole Bagood. I am an associate at the entertainment group at Sheppard Mullin in Century City. We have a great panel today. Let's just get right to it. So fellas, why don't you come on up? We decided to switch the format a little bit. At the last 10 minutes, you can give us questions, but we want to make this more conversational, kind of fireside chat. So if you have questions while we're talking about something, please just raise your hand. I think Guy is going to come around with a microphone, and we can just open it up pretty quickly. All right. So to start, fellas, why don't you tell us who you are, where you work, and how you found yourself in the esports world?
Cool. Can you guys hear me? I think so. All right. My name's Deric Ortiz. I'm the CEO of Advocate. We're a sponsorship management platform that makes sponsoring streamers, any number of streamers, pretty turnkey. We currently help manage campaigns across about 6% of Twitch's traffic month over month. We work with about 11 of the biggest teams in the world. And the way I got started in this is I helped ideate Geico's first entrance into the gaming space in 2015, and then T-Mobile hired me as a consultant for 2.5 years, where I helped them understand sort of like gaming opportunities. And that's my shtick.
Cool. Hey, can everyone hear me? If I'm squinting, it's because it's very bright directly in front of me. I'm Justin. I'm the CEO of Adder. I dropped out of college when I was 18 and lived on a friend's couch. After a year of making no money, I decided I wanted to go into gaming. And since then, I've become the youngest CEO to get investment from Disney. Last year, I got Forbes 30 under 30. Right now, our real niche is management of talent and advertising. We're probably the second or third largest in the ecosystem after my friends here at Loaded, who are a little bit bigger than us. But fundamentally, our service is to help talent start to work with brands on a more professional level. We consider ourselves a brand-focused talent agency.
Hey, my name is Niles Heron. I'm a co-founder of a company called Popdog, which is not Loaded, but which owns Loaded. It's a tangled corporate web. It doesn't really matter. I'm from Detroit originally, and currently am trying to figure out how to better serve this ecosystem specifically. I got my start in gaming when I was 15 or 16. I started a radio station, specifically because I felt like gamers needed entertainment when they weren't playing. And that was before Twitch. This is back in like 2001, 2002. And that set me on this really interesting path. As a kid from Detroit, there weren't many kids in my neighborhood that were playing games, but I was able to connect with this whole world online that was markedly safer than the one that I was in at that moment. And I continue to try to figure out through Loaded, where we manage 40 of the top streamers on Twitch, and Popdog, where we're building technology to make gaming more accessible for brands and more accessible for streamers and more accessible for viewers, is our goal. We think that, gaming can be bigger than it is. We think it's great. We're super excited. And we also think that it should fundamentally be a little bit larger. And so we're trying to figure out how to help that be easier, how to make that easier for the stakeholders.
My name's Sherman. I work at Gen.G. We are an esports ownership group, so we own and operate esports teams. We operate Soul Dynasty and Overwatch. We have League of Legends, Fortnite, Apex, Clash Royale. We have teams in China, in Korea, and here in LA. And my role is I'm head of partnerships and revenue operations, so we think about what we're trying to do from sponsors' perspective, what we try to do with different partners that we work with. We also have an influencer team that's an all-female influencer team that matches with our Fortnite team, which is an all-female competitive Fortnite team. And before this, my background is in traditional sports. So I worked at Major League Baseball in sponsorship for 6.5 years. And then I moved to LA, and I worked at the LA Clippers in sponsorship. And then I moved over to Gen.G, which is my first foray into esports last year.
Great. All right, Niles, question for you. We're talking about gamer entertainment versus esports. What's the difference between the two? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think that it's one of the conversations we have most often with brands that we are helping funnel talent and deliverables into. Gaming video content is usually how I describe gamer entertainment. And gaming video content is anything that you would consume video online, usually live streamed, often not though. YouTube is often not live streamed. But it's content that's focused around gaming. And most viewers don't arbitrarily decide the way we do as people who work really actively in the industry what kind of content they're watching. It's gaming, right? You're watching a VOD on YouTube, you're watching somebody live, you're taking in gaming content. So I think of gaming video content as the big bucket, right? That's anything that is gaming related that is coming through YouTube, Twitch, Mixer, Caffeine, Facebook, etc. Esports specifically is like this niche subset of it that is hierarchical competition, and it's volumetrically much lower. It's a much smaller piece of the pie in terms of the total content that's created, and large just structurally, right? I mean, you have teams that are practicing for 10 hours or 15 hours for each match that they're competing in. The match is 1 hour. So you're talking about 15 prep hours to 1 hour of actual content. If you're a content streamer on Twitch, you just play for 16 hours, right? And you get as many viewers as you get during that time. So there are kind of like different barriers and gates in terms of the way you engage with that content and the value of the content. Esports is also a much harder thing to brand, in that gaming video content, if you're thinking about a Twitch streamer or a YouTube streamer or someone making a video, they have full control over their panels, they have full control over what sponsorships and branding they present. Whereas in esports match, often you have the logo, the space on a jersey, you have limited real estate to promote, a commercial partner or things like that. So there's some structural differences, but basically esports is the little box, gaming video content is the much broader one.
So given that difference, what's the value of gamer entertainment, and why has it maybe not been valued like it should be by esports up until this point? And that's a question for anybody on the panel.
I'll throw my gauntlet in the ring. I think the challenge traditionally has been that investors and those who are excited about esports hear esports and they associate immediately with sports. In sports, we all know the value of a league, we understand the value of an organization. And in esports, it's very easy to make that translation and assume that these teams are worth a lot of money for their capabilities as competitors. But what's changing right now, and I think that the challenge that these esports are running into, is that a player or a creator will oftentimes have more viewership independently than an entire league will on a course of a day, a month, and a year. So traditionally, the teams didn't care so much about streaming because they're investors. And the brands were saying, let's just focus on the competitive element. It's what we know. It's what we can relate to traditional sports. Whereas suddenly it's like, oh heck, a player or a single streamer has more viewership than the entire league that we just spent $40 million buying into. And that's the transition that we're seeing now.
Jordan, do you have any thoughts on that from your background?
Yeah, I mean, we're aware of that for sure. We obviously want the league to succeed and grow, but I think anybody who's in a franchise league is in it for the long haul. Like, we believe in our partners that this is something that it's going to take years to build fans. Like, people come up to me and they're like, "I'm a Soul Dynasty fan." I'm like, "Really?" I'm still kind of surprised because we're still building. We're still building. Like, if you're an NBA fan, if you're a Clippers fan, you can go to a game, you can buy a shirt, and you can talk to people, and there's a bunch, social media is really invested in the NBA. It's we're still building a lot of that stuff, and I think what the streamers do, which is great, is that they already have a personality. That's why the viewership is so good, because people really feel for them, they know them, they feel almost like that they're their friend, and the teams need to do that and establish identity. It just takes us a little bit more time because we're a brand and a logo and players that are always changing, instead of just one person who's always on.
I mean, it's about content, right? At the end of the day, the reason the reason almost all, if not all, NBA teams are valued at more than $1 billion isn't that people started. It's not that the competition got better. It's not that anything got harder. It's that Turner and Disney spent $7 billion a year or something like that, right, to buy national games. They bought the content. This industry is going to be no different. It is already that in a lot of ways, and it comes down to really simple math in some ways. If you have a 15-to-1 ratio, getting someone who can be 1-to-1 in terms of content practice or prep towards content, right? The amount of time you spend gaming versus the amount of time you spend broadcasting and creating content that people can engage with is, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like if I can only play for 1 hour, I can only get as many people as I can get to watch me in an hour. If I stream 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, my ceiling just got way higher. Ninja alone, between March and October of 2018, moved 3 billion minutes more to the public than Black Panther in aggregate. Just Fortnite.
I think the other value of that is that like creating streaming content is essentially free. You do it from your bedroom. You don't need like huge production sets.
Right.
You don't need a full sort of production team. It's a kid in his pajamas, right, with some weird toys behind him, right? Like that's what you need to make money.
Yeah, you don't need to maximize the hour value. An esports event has to maximize their value. They have to make it a spectacle
100%.
because you got to get as many people to watch for that one day, that one weekend, in X number of weeks, right, or X number of months that you have this opportunity. You have to maximize that.
And so a way to think of that is like, if you think about like TV media or like OTT, when you sort of advertise across the CPM, across those platforms, what's baked into that CPM is like the cost of actually creating that episode, right, or the cost of producing that event. And with streamers, like it's zero. So I think over time you should see sort of like the cost to sort of advertise across streamers should drop, right? Because there's no content cost so like anchored to that.
Also with streamers, like I always tell people the difference between pros and streamers, pro athletes, is that pro athletes aren't used to actually engaging with people one-to-one on camera and online in real time. It's a skill.
Yeah.
And like these streamers they know their audience, they know how to do it, they know how to sell product, they know how to just sell an experience, where a pro athlete the experience is the game itself, not like the one-on-one.
I liken it to stand-up comedy a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Derek, I know you had some thoughts about that, streamers versus professional athletes.
Yeah. So I think like a big difference between professional athletes and streamers is that historically a professional athlete essentially earned their spotlight through sort of ability and performance, and then I think in today's age with streamers, it's more of sort of like this do-it-yourself combined with the flexibility of either being good, having a personality that draws people, or a mixture of both. So I think that like makes streaming like hyper accessible, and that's I think the value. There's also just no gatekeepers. There's no like NCAA to sort of like deal with, because again, you're in your pajamas. You got toys, and so you got to deal with mom, right? But like as long as mom's cool, you're good to go.
As long as your tours are done, then you can stream. I guess that's the rule.
I would say that the inverse of that though is that when the gate and barrier is so low, the signal to noise ratio gets way harder to overcome, right? The number of streamers, when you look at Twitch, the number of streamers that get more than 50 concurrent viewers is like, I think you're already in the 1% range.
Yeah.
You're comfortably in the 1% range. And so the value of being able to overcome that minimum threshold, one of the things that we see in most of the live streaming platforms is that the fundamental criteria upon which people are sort of ranked and sorted is how many viewers do you have?
Sure.
Which means that there are 10,000 people that stream on Twitch a day, less than 1% of them ever get more than 50 concurrent viewers. That's a really long tail and a really difficult barrier to get over. So yeah, a lot of people stream in their pajamas, but the ones that you see successful often often there was something special about them.
I agree with that, but I'd also sort of, another way to sort of think about that 1% is there are 15,000 channels with over 10,000 followers that all demand their own following. That's a huge number of people. How are you going to work with all 15,000? There are tools out there and solutions that will help you scale and deliver ads across all of those, right? You don't need to necessarily advertise with just the top. You can sort of democratize your advertising across the entire platform.
Totally, but in order to be alone, so not, and this is, there's friendly going, we can go to the next question at whatever point, but I think that there really is a reality that in order to be able to do this full time, right, to not have this just something that you earn some money in mom's basement, but really to look at this as like, this is a business that I am growing, you got to be able to make enough money off those advertisements, however they scaled into your space, whether that's the standard Twitch or YouTube ad rev split for the pre-roll or mid-roll that you're running, or if that's whatever else. I mean, like, you got to have enough density of users, much like any investable commodity, right? Like, if 50 people use your product, I'm not giving you money. I don't care.
So for the streamer, no, go for
I
it.
wanted to address this and kind of go back to the original question, and I think tie this into the previous question about the role of esports teams, because I think it's a really good transition part. So the first part is, you talked a little bit about how esports teams are trying to gain value in the ecosystem. And a lot of people here have probably read the Kotaku article that came out 2 weeks ago talking about investments in esports. I always think that's a really funny article because it talks about $1 billion of investment money coming in. The fact is, building one esports, like one stadium for traditional sports, costs over $1 billion. $1 billion is not a lot for a development ecosystem, not at all. And yet Kotaku uses that number as worry, worry, worry. To me, that's a very small number. What investors are investing in is this philosophy that the quality of content and the experience for viewers is going to grow to such a point where brands, as well as deals across TV networks, et cetera, are going to justify that value. What's interesting to me is that I think the role of an esports team is kind of changing. Whereas before, the only place they could justify that value was during these esports competitions, an hour of content. Now they can actually work with their pro athletes and make them into bigger entertainers. And I think we're seeing a lot of teams start to invest more heavily in educating their top competitors into becoming personalities as well. That's why Fortnite, which many consider to be the largest esport in the world, is primarily made up of competitors who live stream. It's because teams see the value in having a creator who also has a personality. And I think that that's actually a really good thing for esports because it's broadening the horizon and making it much easier for an investor to see a return on their money. As before, 1 hour of content, now they can get 15 hours a day. For me, what this means is that the value of an esports organization is moving away less from their capabilities to compete and more for their capabilities to grow content creators into personalities. That's why we're seeing a ton of these organizations start to invest a lot of their energy, not just to get a top player, but to make them a big streamer. A lot of you guys have seen the controversies recently with FaZe, 100 Thieves. These are organizations that are primarily focused on building people, less so in content,
They're investing
less so
in
than they
content,
are in
yeah.
winning tournaments. So there is a transition in, I think, the purpose that an esports organization provides in the ecosystem.
They recognize, I think people have recognized that a viewer is a viewer, whether they came during Tuesday morning stream or Tuesday night competition.
Yeah.
The ad cut the same way. You didn't get more money for the ad that ran during the competition. It's the same split. So the point is maximizing that.
Yeah.
And that kind of shifts the focus of a lot of organizations, which is why you're seeing more teams, I think, really look at how they can use influencers to build a content library for their brands.
And the teams already have a lot of recognition, so they're already leveraging
Exactly.
their existing brand. Like you said, you have fans you didn't even know existed, right? You get to leverage that. A lot of independent creators, to your point, and to your point, they struggle to get to that 50 concurrent viewer amount. But you join a team, you get that immediately because the team already has recognition in the ecosystem.
Exactly.
So for the streamers that have made it, what role do streamers play in the promotion of esports? Is it to be an example for professional athletes to get a shtick, to learn how to entertain more in the way that streamers do, or how are they promoting esports?
Professional athletes, you said?
No, streamers. How are streamers?
Oh, how are streamers supporting?
How are they currently promoting esports, and how do you expect them to do so in the future?
Gotcha. Well, so I would say there's a couple of different things for us. I think you're totally right, by the way, but I was kind of just thinking about the response there. You know, originally we wanted, I think teams really wanted to be in franchise leagues because there's stability in those leagues over the long term. You have a value, you have a brand, you can build. And then, you know, streamers come up, become really popular, and teams realize that they need it to support other lanes of business. So like 100 Thieves, for example, does an amazing job with merchandise. And they've used their streamers really well to grow merchandise. What we're thinking of is something kind of different. Like we're actually going down the lines of like education on both sides of the spectrum. So we're trying to think of, okay, what's a high school student who wants to be a streamer? How do they learn, and how do we actually plug into that atmosphere, that role, to help provide them a path to know how to do this? Or how do we actually help them get to their next level, whether it's like at an educational point or if it's just part of the esports ecosystem? Or what does it look like for someone who wants to get a job in esports? How do we help infiltrate in that? Or once you're a competitive player and you're retired and you want to become a streamer, how do we help you actually launch into that part of your career and stay involved with you as well? So I think being a streamer, there's really a whole lifespan and all the teams are trying to figure out which pieces of it do we want to participate in, so we don't just jump in on someone who's already a megastar and we're not actually providing them any value, and in some cases maybe we're even hurting them. How do we help people on both ends of the spectrum make their careers better?
It's like one thing I like about our industry is like teams like you are sort of like ideating on your own, and like not all teams are playing from the same playbook. Like you guys are all experimenting and trying new things in this new industry, and I'm glad we have teams like that, right? Or else we wouldn't really learn.
And we're collaborative too on it. Like when I was at MLB and NBA, like we didn't really talk to any other teams about anything. And here, like in esports, like people are like on a Slack channel or a Discord channel, like are actively talking about it. I think that's really good to kind of see it, because in some ways, like we all kind of need each other to start building businesses.
Yeah.
Right.
To answer the specific question on what role does influencers play, because I think you touched on it, they're the role models, right? Now, when I look at an esports team, you know, I'm a young, aspiring gamer. I'm going to look at a team like TSM or FaZe, or you guys over there at Gen.G. I'm also going to look at a Ninja. I'm going to look at a Vader. I'm going to look at a Lyric. Those are people that I'm going to see as my role models for being successful.
Shroud.
Shroud, another great one. Shroud specifically because he's a really good competitive shooter.
Exactly.
Content creator. So
Dry as hell. I love Shroud. Listen, he's my client. Love him to death. Super dry. You're not watching Shroud because of how funny he is, right? You're watching Shroud because you didn't know that a hand-eye coordination set could produce that result. How did you see that guy and you shot him across the map? Like, I don't know what just happened. I'm baffled. That's why Shroud's amazing.
but that promotes esports heavily because
Exactly.
as a small creator, you know that you're unlikely to hit the size of Shroud. But when you partner with an esports organization, you're going to see growth, and you're going to be able to use that skill set. Same way that a young kid who wants to play soccer is going to look at Messi, right? And then they're going to try to get on their high school team, and maybe then make it to their college team, maybe the U.S. Olympics or the World Championships.
There's also just like an implicit competition in video games, multiplayer online video games, right? Whether you're competing or not, every Fortnite game is a competition. Every single Fortnite game, every Counter-Strike game, every League game. Like these are competitions. There is a winner, there is a loser. The person who wins 99 times out of 100 was better than the person who lost.
Except in Hearthstone.
You notice I did not mention Hearthstone. But I say that because when you watch, so I played Counter-Strike in high school. I still play Counter-Strike today, or I started playing Counter-Strike after like 12 years off. But I don't actually want to watch Fortnite, if I'm being totally honest. It's not my game. The building, they have like weird wings. It's a different world than I am super excited by. But when I watch Counter-Strike players, if I watch a Counter-Strike player and I'm not competitive, often they aren't either. But if they aren't better than me, I don't want to watch them anymore.
Right.
Just at a base level, right? Unless I am watching purely for entertainment value, which I haven't found anybody who's playing Counter-Strike on the internet today who's doing it purely for entertainment value. It's not that kind of game. But I say that because I think that there's this aspirational value to video games and the consumption of the content that most streamers are able, like you're better than 99.5% of everybody else who plays the game on the planet if you're streaming it, probably. And if you have 50 concurrent viewers, that is almost certainly the case. And so you end up in this world where the viewer can still aspire to be you as the streamer, even if you are not Kobe.
Right.
Right? There's this middle range, which like in basketball, you don't see that as much because
It's only the top of the top.
because I only ever see LeBron.
Right. Right.
Right? But if I could watch somebody who was remarkably better than me, the gap that I would then have is he's probably taller, probably not as heavy as I am, right? He can probably do some things that I can't do. Like, I can go left and right, you can go over. I don't have that button. That's not on my controller, you know what I'm saying? So like, I have all the same controls that Ninja does in Fortnite, that Shroud has in Counter-Strike or Call of Duty or anything like that. So there's this moment of like aspirational reality that I can tap into no matter who I'm watching in gaming, which gives me a different connection with the fan, which then directly feeds into the esports ecosystem. If you're really interested in getting better, there is in fact a top rung. You can in fact start in that ladder, and streamers and content creators that are not necessarily competing still funnel people into that.
All the time.
Right, and we're also talking about the ability of streamers to make an isolating activity a community experience, and their ability to make a community of one too.
Yeah, I think that
I don't believe in communities of one, but I hear you.
I do believe in communities of one because I think that creating content on Twitch is a very solitary experience. I think it's one of the challenges that a lot of investors who come into the ecosystem, they're thinking traditional sports, they still think that this is a lot of people together. When you produce content, oftentimes, unless you're on a traditional esports team, and even when you are on a traditional esports team, sometimes you're alone, right? You may be competing online with some people you've never met before in person. And what that means is that the kind of personality that succeeds on Twitch, the kind of personality that succeeds in competitive esports is a different personality than the kind of person who succeeds on the court. You talked about a lot of the differences between looking at a Kobe versus looking at a Shroud, right? But fundamentally, there's a different type of temperament that goes into this ecosystem.
No, Kobe's an asshole. Kobe doesn't want to talk to anybody. Kobe wants to work out alone in the gym, just like Shroud wants to play alone in his room. Like, and frankly, Shroud is implicitly more interactive with more people over the same. If Kobe spends 5 hours in a gym, Shroud spends 5 hours playing a game and streaming. Shroud interacted with exponentially more people than Kobe did.
But the point of a solitary, like a social experience of one, is that he's alone, right?
Well, he's physically alone in the room,
and that's
but he's
important.
but he's not, because when you think about, so I hear what you're saying. I would challenge it just to say that fundamentally, like Shroud. So assume again, we're going to normalize skill set. So Kobe can't jump over the guy. He's got to outsmart that person.
He's got my skill set.
Me and you, we're in this together. We are not a community of one. We are a community of two in this moment. So what I'm saying is that like Shroud is playing against another human, not a bot, not a computer. That person has the same, like if you've played a competitive game, you know that you're actually playing, you're not playing the game, you're playing the other person. All the time. Like we can both look left, look right, we can both shoot. I have to get there faster. I have to know when you're gonna get there. There is a competitive element and a competitive expertise that is so deeply interactive. Competitive gaming is psychology. If we could figure out how to create a good bridge from competitive gamers to like being therapists, I actually think we could solve some mental health problems in this country. Because you can, like being able to read other people is such a deep skill. It is actually the most fundamental skill I think that competitive gamers have. So I get.
Are you saying that it's like an equal field of between you and Shroud because he's not 6 feet tall?
Yes, I'm saying that.
But his brain's different. Like it's not.
What I'm saying is that there is not a physical barrier to discourage me from trying to get there.
100%.
I am not suggesting that he. No, listen. If there were nothing between me and Shroud, I wouldn't be here. Because I really like video games.
I agree.
Right? Like we wouldn't be doing this.
You'd be here with us.
No,
you didn't want to
I
hang
would
out
not.
with us.
I would not be here with you. If I were Shroud, I promise I would not.
So back to my point about a community of one, it's less about the interaction element that comes with Twitch. I think everyone knows that Twitch is a social experience.
Sure.
It's that there is a different component to socializing with someone over the internet versus socializing with someone in person. Sure. And I know that for a fact. If you come and talk to me after this, I'm a little bit awkward, but when I'm on stage, I'm a lot more confident because there's less of that interpersonal relationship, right? I think that happens on Twitch a lot, and it affects the kind of people who succeed on the platform.
I think we can see it in another way though also, because there's like a ton of professional athletes that have like tried to make streaming happen, right? And what they find out is that their big brands don't matter as much. They get 100 followers or 100 viewers, right? And it's because they earn their spotlight through their performance, not their personality, right? And so it's a completely different beast, and people are starting to understand that.
Totally agree. I just don't think it's a community of one. I agree with the
You
point
don't
you're
like the
making.
term.
I just don't think it's a solitary experience.
I've never heard the term
I don't
before.
know if I necessarily agree with the last point because two things. One, okay, so we're a team organization, so we're always looking at streamers, but we're not just focused on gaming streamers because there's two layers to it. The first layer is, okay, whoever's a big streamer now, they're already established. What we're interested in is who's the next level. Like we're trying to think 5-10 years into the future. And how do you get them to want to come to your organization? Like a kid who plays basketball or football wants to go to a certain school, and like that's their goal is to be recruited and play at that school. We want to be like that aspirational aspect. I want to be a streamer for Gen.G down the line. Now, that streamer doesn't necessarily have to be a gamer. Like we're interested in like cosplayers and people who do kitchen and people who do just chatting and beauty. All these different things that you could live stream that have a connection to people, because not everyone is just solely a gamer. And I think politics also part of that too. Like just all the different ways that people kind of identify themselves and inspire others through live streaming is something that teams are starting to look at over time because we kind of see it growing 5 to 10 years. We also did something, we did it with Chris Bosch, who's a former basketball player, and he played Call of Duty on our stream. And he didn't do that many people, it was only like 100 people at the time. But what was really cool was that he was so good at multitasking, being a former professional athlete. He was playing Call of Duty and talking to the chat and communicating. And it was, for the people who were there, it was a one-on-one experience with Chris Bosch, and he was answering every single question.
That's awesome.
So that's what we're thinking too, is like, okay, how do you bring someone that you already know into the gaming world where you can communicate with them? And maybe it's okay if it's an exclusive stream. You know, maybe it's okay if it's not that many people, because you get your question in.
Sure.
Right. Well, Jordan, I'm glad you answered that last question because this question I want to ask you. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about streamers and brands and advertisers. I mean, it used to be that big brands and advertisers would question whether or not that they need to pay attention to esports. I think we're way past that at this point. For brands and companies that want to get involved in this ecosystem, you know, what are some of the pitfalls that they might have to avoid? Like, how do they get involved if they're like a non-endemic brand?
Yeah, so I would say, like, in my personal opinion, maybe you guys agree, like, I think the bar is just so low in like a really good way, because there's just not that many brands that are activating in esports right now, and you have this whole generation of people that grew up with the aspiration to be sponsored. And if they're sponsored and if they have brands, they're legitimized as really good. Like, you see even just like casually on Instagram and Twitter, people will hashtag ad just as a joke, like amongst their friends. So you're kind of seeing where like all of a sudden becoming branded and becoming sponsored is making success. And I think in professional sports, and I did this for a long time, but I think people, like, you're wearing a Mets hat. Like, I think you love the Mets regardless of who the official auto sponsor is, or regardless of who like the New Jersey patch sponsor is going to be.
Only Honda, right?
Like, your connection to the Mets is probably through like your family and your friends and where you grew up, and like there's just a lot of layers to that. There's like 80 years of Mets history, whereas Gen.G, it's like there's just 2 years of history, and for a lot of these streamers, there's 0 history. So for brands that can kind of come in and provide value to someone, even if it's just a little bit of value, you're already doing so much more, and there's so much more white space. So I always tell people, like, don't be worried as much about the pitfalls. As long as you don't insult or do anything that's like over the line, and that's what we're there to help, it's going to actually be perceived as very positive.
And Deric, you've worked with big companies. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say the trap that most brands sort of get into is that they try to sort of like figure out like this like safe space within the gaming space, the space that they don't understand. Like a great example of that would be like Geico. They didn't really understand gaming, so they were really scared of violence, and they were like, you know, no Street Fighter, no anything. You had to basically play like Hearthstone, and that was like the only game they were cool with. But fast forward today, and they're sponsoring Street Fighter, and they're sponsoring, you know, they're involved with Evo, right? And it's this idea that, you know, you don't define the market, right? Like, this is the market, you have to understand it, and then you just have to find, you know, sort of like the persona or sort of activity that you relate to, right? But I think they've got to like normalize, you know, video game violence a little bit, right? And competition, and they've just got to get used to that.
And there's like a deeper piece to gaming and our general culture with that question, right? I mean, I think a lot of gaming stories, like the normalization of gaming as an activity, got shaken a bit during the late 90s and early 2000s, and I don't know in a lot of ways that we've always recovered from it. Like, the Columbine shooters were Doom players, and that was like a big part of that story, was that they had modded out this Doom world to look like the cafeteria of that school. And we decided gamers were like these antisocial people in basements that weren't able to socialize, that weren't able to be friends with people, like as a culture, like broad culture. I don't mean like in this room necessarily, but I mean like when 10 years ago, if you told somebody, oh, I'm a gamer, they look at you a little bit funny. They still look at you a little bit funny, but it's not as bad today. And I think that part of that is just the relationship between our country and its violence, right? I mean, I think we don't do always a great job of recognizing that games don't make people violent. And I think brands fall into that same thing. But I end up having that same discussion with lots of brands all the time, both from a race, sex, culture place, and like how sort of non-inclusive and non-welcoming the gaming space can be, and whether or not brands want to associate with that. all the way through, to like, what are the games that we can comfortably stand behind, and we don't want to promote violence. And it's like, well, listen, guys, this is gaming, and it's not abnormal in and of itself. This competitive world. Show me a competition that has zero negative energy anywhere in it, and we can have a different discussion, I think.
Yeah, do you have
I just wanted to add off of something you said earlier, which is that it's becoming cool to be sponsored, right? When I started doing this way back when, oh my God, you guys saw it 24/7, every sponsored stream. And now it's seen us cashing in, and that transition is something I credit a lot to esports teams, credit a lot to good management companies like Loaded. I think that it's a really interesting difference, and it's made it a lot easier for new live streamers and new esports teams to succeed in the ecosystem. But I still think that brands struggle in the space because they're trying to overcome an issue that is endemic to our industry. And I know I can't speak for Loaded or the guys at Popdog, but I ran into this, and I assume they did as well. When we started managing talent, we had to not only educate brands on the fact that the talent would actually deliver on the requested deliverables. We've probably run into this a lot. But also educate the talent on the fact that no matter how much they want to think that they're a princess, they're not a princess and they're the one being paid, right? So I think that that's definitely been a real challenge for brands. And it's one of the reasons that even though all brands know about esports now and they're all interested, they're still kind of hesitantly putting their feet in because they might have tested in the past and been completely burned by the manager that was the best friend's cousin, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
cool.
Okay, great. Well, we have some questions.
Oh, you guys can look there.
Yeah, it's hard to.
Great. I can
Niles,
barely
Niles,
read
Niles.
that.
Ooh. Niles, you got a question there.
What is the biggest threat to Twitch, and how do the other business elements of Popdog interact, enhance the Loaded roster of talent? That's a very specific and interesting question. I think that my answer is that the biggest threat to Twitch is dilution. I think that Twitch is a great platform. I think they have a great audience. I think Twitch has done an amazing job over the years of building a community and an ethos to the people that are watching. I also think that, as is the nature of any small, great idea that is absorbed by a broader behemoth tech company, there are many masters that Twitch needs to serve. The question really is, the biggest threat to Twitch is not knowing who their master is. Like, is Twitch's master its community, or is it Amazon? Is it Jeff Bezos? And I'm sure, like, Jeff is a good guy and has, like, I've never met him, so I can't speak to that, right? But has, like, a set of aligned principles that he wants to see the companies that are under his umbrella pursue, and that there are then C-levels and X, Y, Z levels under that before you even get to Twitch of corporate control, structure, and directive. I think that that's a really tough thing to navigate for any company, right? To get absorbed into a company that large and be able to keep your identity and your focus, because the focus is what made them special.
Right.
They said, we are here for creators, we are here for the community, that is all we are focusing on. I don't know that that's still the case. I also don't work at Twitch. I've never worked at Twitch. I have no vested interest in any direction here. Like, all of my talent for the most part are Twitch talent. But I think that their ability to keep their community together is going to be their biggest threat.
Justin, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed on the head one of the biggest challenges that Twitch is running into. I think any time that there's a greater authority over you, it makes things challenging. I know an issue that we run into, and I'm sure you do too, is analytics are still impossible to get from Twitch because Amazon owns them, and you can't put a pixel anywhere, right? So I think you touched that really well. To touch about, I can't really talk about how Popdog interacts and enhances the Loaded roster of talent. But I can say that I think a challenge that Twitch is running into across the board is whether or not they're a platform for big creators or for the community.
Right.
This is an issue you'll see in the subreddit all the time. Small creators hate the fact that when they're rated, it shows an ad to every person who doesn't use ad block. Small creators hate the fact that when you have Twitch Prime, now you're still going to see ads sometimes. Small creators, if they could, would remove ads entirely.
Large creators too, it turns out.
Large creators too. And I think the problem there is that Twitch is a money-building organization. They need to pay their employees, whereas before they just took a loss every year. And that's creating a lot of tension for creators, especially the smaller ones who are now leaving to other platforms like Mixer,
where they have a lot more freedom and control over the viewer experience.
But I think that's caused because like Twitch basically created this new medium that everybody uses, right? But they sort of bolted on this old sort of way to deliver sort of advertising, which is just pre-roll and mid-roll, right? And it's sort of like not necessarily, it's like, you know, shoving a square into a circle sort of peg or hole or something. You guys kind of, yeah.
Yeah, we get it.
That's all I want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue.
The only I don't want to ignore how do the other business elements of Popdog interact and enhance the loaded roster of talent. We own a platform called NoScope. NoScope is an enterprise-grade analytics platform for Twitch. We can't track pixels because Twitch is Twitch, but we do have a number of views and filters that make it easier to decipher Twitch data, to look at historical data in terms of what games have performed well, how they have performed well, what they have done relative to other games while they were performing well, what did the ecosystem broadly look like, how does a streamer track over time. That has allowed us to enhance the roster of talent because frankly we were able to see Ninja start growing 6 months before he streamed with Drake, right? And so we were able to start discussions from just a talent perspective and say, hey, you know, how are you thinking about your business? What do you want this business to grow into? And also then in terms of educating, so we do a lot to educate our talent as much as we can in terms of the business value of the position that they're in. On the other side of that, most of the brand discussions we have end up coming back to a data set where we're saying, this is what Twitch has looked like over the course of 3 years. Here are the games that have performed well. This is the era we're in now. It's the era of Battle Royale. That is the soup du jour. You got to be down with it if that's what you want. If you want to see the most impact on Twitch, whether you're a publisher, what games have done well, when have they peaked and valleyed, and just being as educational and transparent as possible to our partners to say this is what the data tells us. These are our interpretations of that data, and we try to use that to help build like holistic business positions around our talent as often as possible.
So like even though pixel tracking isn't available, there are sort of other ways. So like my company Advocate, we're pretty big on attribution modeling. So essentially everything that gets sent out by one of the teams that uses us, like Cloud9 or Team Liquid, it gets click tracked. We track their IPs. We can match that to a consumer database. So you know it's not as like crude as it may seem, right? Like technologies are involved in this space. Popdog's working on stuff too, where you know we're getting smarter quicker.
Yeah, as quickly as we can. We recognize that I think that's the biggest barrier for when you talk about non-endemic brands getting into the space. I think the hardest thing in the world to do is convince a CMO that'll buy that doesn't look like anything else they have ever bought is something they should do, no matter how big the opportunity set is. You're gonna get a PR budget, not a marketing budget. The thing that is actually holding endemic brands back is that they're spending out of their PR budgets into gaming and not their marketing media buying budget. They are not looking at gaming as a media buy. It's a PR like guerrilla marketing initiative, and that's again, when one person moves more units than Black Panther does, like by minutes consumed, that's one person
powerful,
like this is not a niche industry anymore. This is huge, big time dollars that should be being thrown at it, but none of the data makes any sense. None of it looks like any of the other media I buy. Why? No. I'm gonna just buy the one that I know brings back 1.2. And I'm gonna do that 1 million times and get my 20% and call it a day. No matter how much you say I can get over here, if you can't show me the data for it.
Right. And in our last 2 minutes, let's answer the last question, which Jordan, I think that's for you.
Cool. So this is about influencers in an international audience. So we own and operate 5 teams in Korea, 3 in the US, and 1 in China. So a lot of brands come to us because they actually want to tell their story locally. So we actually work with different offices, China, Korea, and United States, to tell a story using influencers in the native language, in the native artistic style, and in a way, in an offer that you could actually buy the product there. So that's a value that we bring, but it makes it really hard for us because we go through all these things where should our Instagram be Korea only and US only and China only? Do we want to actually divide that? And how much do we really believe in crossover audience? How much do we think that like stars in the US will be stars in Asia and then vice versa? And which influencers make sense, especially when there's a language barrier? Can a huge influencer be huge with a subtitle underneath for every single live stream that they have? And where we're kind of going in that, where I talked about education, is we're kind of thinking of it from the ground up, like elementary, middle, and high school students. giving them esports education and thinking about what that cross-reference looks like, where if you're a streamer growing up in Korea, how do we actually bring you to the United States and set up a business platform that takes you either to schools or opportunities, and then vice versa. If you're a great streamer, a great player here in the US, how do we get you into tournaments in Asia? How do we get you in front of an audience? All the same stuff you see in the NBA, like the biggest NBA players going to China and Japan and Taiwan every single summer to talk to people that are huge fans. We want that eventually for our teams and our players.
To go pick up a bag. I mean, like, they're going to China, they're getting cashed out for that.
Yeah, well, they have so many fans.
Right.
But also you'll see, like, they do really cool, like, I don't know if you saw that Steph Curry was over there, and they
I
brought
just
out
saw
these, like,
Clay miss a lot.
okay, yeah, he had a bad
I saw
dunk.
Clay didn't do very well.
They had this thing, it was like a gimmick where Steph Curry came out and they had these two 12-foot guys holding their hands up and they try to get him to shoot threes and they just kept blocking it. Like, it's just a different way of interpreting the same type of content.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about that too. Like, you can't sell the people here the same thing that we're selling them in Korea and in China, and how to change that. So there's a lot of different layers to it.
Right. Well, I think that's our time, guys. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks everyone for attending the Encore panel.